Good morning. I'm Matt Pearl. I'm director of the Strategic Technologies Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. And we're very lucky this morning to have the opportunity to have a conversation with two very distinguished guests. So we have Congressman and Ranking Member Raja Krishnamoorthi. The Congressman was elected to Congress in 2016. He represents Chicago's west and north suburbs. He serves as ranking member on the Select Committee on Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. He also serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Oversight and Government Reform as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Health and Financial Services as well. And I would say, among other things, he's been a leader on technological competition for the United States. In addition to quantum, on chips, workforce, oversight of technology issues. And so we're very fortunate to have him. We also have Jim Lewis, who needs no introduction, but I will provide one anyway. Jim, among many other things, led the Quantum Commission that CSIS just wrapped up. Which really had a lot of in-depth analysis and recommendations on quantum. And so we're going to get into some of that today. And so in addition to other things, Jim is one of the foremost policy experts on emerging and critical technologies, as well as cybersecurity. So I'll just get right into it. Quantum is absolutely critical to our geostrategic competition with the People's Republic of China. It's broadly the application of quantum information science to a variety of domains that includes computing, communication, sensing, but really holds the potential to exponentially transform our technological capabilities, and that's why we're talking about it. So I'll get started with the panelists. There are a lot of different key components to being competitive in quantum. But one of the concerns that we've heard a lot from the commission and the private sector was a struggle to find a quantum workforce. Representative Krishnamoorthi and Jim, what do you think are the crucial steps that the U.S. needs to take in order to develop and deploy a skilled quantum workforce?
Sure. Jim, do you want to go first?
I'm happy to let you go first, but I'll go first if you wish.
Okay, sure.
After you, Alphonse. No. Yeah, one of the things we found in this discussion, this was a strange group, as I think I said, in that it was half venture capitalists and half physicists. So it was unusual to get them and very engaged. And one of the things they said is quantum technologies have reached the point where you don't need a PhD in physics anymore. And you need to start thinking about how you train not only master's degrees, but which would be unusual, but other parts of the workforce, the engineers, the technicians. So this is a place where the market hasn't quite caught up in sending the signal, build more of these workers. So I thought that was really interesting. NSF has a role, other places have a role, but we haven't started pumping out below the theoretical physicist level to the degree we need.
Congressman, do you have anything to add?
Well, I think that there are multiple aspects of this. One is, as Jim said, you don't necessarily need a postgraduate degree to participate in this fast-growing field. However, we do need innovation to remain in the United States. So that means we need a STEM workforce. We also need, quite frankly, we need to fix our legal immigration system to make sure that the best and brightest researchers, doctoral students, and postgraduate students from around the world do their work here, because they are likely to stay here and to start their companies here and basically make sure that we remain the source of innovation as well as wealth and prosperity in this area. As you know, our legal immigration system is completely messed up right now, to use a very technical term. And just as an aside, I have to note Nature, the periodical Nature just ran a poll of 1,600 scientists across various fields, everything from quantum, but also to the biotech fields and so forth. And 75% of them said that they're considering relocating themselves to other countries. And we're not just talking about immigrant scientists, we're talking about native-born indigenous scientists who feel that their work is not being supported now. And that makes all the sense in the world, given what we've seen with the chaos with Doge and Elon Musk and Donald Trump cutting the budgets of NIST, NSF. I don't believe that the National Quantum Initiative has been fully funded, even though this was a law that Donald Trump signed in 2018, believe it or not. So let's fix the legal immigration system. Let's make sure that we don't create chaos in the grant-making institutions that enable for next generation research to happen in quantum. And then finally, let's upgrade the skills of our kind of non-college educated workforce to participate in this field. That's why I focused on career technical and skills-based education. I authored the law along with a couple of Republicans, kind of modernizing our nation's skills-based education system. I want more of those quantum companies to, whether it's a big company like IBM or whether it's the small startups, to participate more in this effort to basically create a pipeline of talent into the field. We're actually doing that here in Illinois, believe it or not, and it's showing it's bearing fruit right now.
Yeah, so I think that's a natural segue, because as we know with these technologies, it really comes down to having regional hubs, right, that have the right combination of government, both federal and state, academia, companies, startups, and large companies, and not only having them and attracting them, but having that collaboration. So you have something really special in the Chicago area in terms of the Chicago Quantum Exchange. Can you talk a little bit about how that came about, the vision for it, and how it was put together?
Great question, and I'm happy to brag about the greatest city in the world, Chicago. Credit belongs to a variety of players, including the governor's office. Governor J.B. Pritzker and his administration have made quantum one of their key priority areas for both creating the conditions to attract investment, but also to go out there and pitch Chicago to startups around the world. But other key players include the University of Chicago, which is kind of, I would say, like the hub. But we also have a quantum park. We have a dedicated, it's a large piece of territory in Chicago that has been essentially designated as where we want to locate as many quantum researchers, companies, other efforts related to quantum in one place. And this is attracting a lot of attention as well. But the quantum exchange is now a state and local, as well as federal kind of partnership. And again, I hope people can visit and see for themselves what's happening, because it's really remarkable. And we're just super excited about what's to come. By the way, I convened a roundtable around this issue with the Quantum Exchange at the University of Chicago. And what was really cool is we got like community college presidents, as well as educators, as well as the aldermen from the city of Chicago who have neighborhoods that abut the park. And what's really neat is that I felt that even the aldermen and people at the grassroots, I mean, you have to understand that aldermen are like super powerful in Chicago, and they are deeply connected into the neighborhoods. And even they are excited, and they're trying to bring more kids from the neighborhood into the park to get exposure to quantum and to understand kind of how this could potentially be a path for them in the future, provided they, continue their education, participate in different activities, maybe even go into STEM related fields. So it really opens people's eyes in a way that few other efforts do.
Yeah, and I should note that we had Kate Timmerman, who's the CEO of the Quantum Exchange, as one of our commission members. And it's kind of a nice symbol in that the park you're talking about used to be a big steel making facility, and it's been abandoned for years. So this is a great story about the transition from the old coal-based industrial base to the new economy of the future. I will say one thing though, is we also had the former head of the National Science Foundation program that handed out quantum scholarships, quantum alerts. And she said for every dollar she gave out, for every qualified applicant, there was another one. So we did that right at the start. We could really double spending. Illinois has done a great job, but we need other states to pick up the pace too.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great points. I think, those points are great on the attracting talent and really having the pipeline side of it. I think another aspect of, the Chicago Exchange that's really interesting on workforce is having that close collaboration between the startups and industry and academia, so that the academics are doing the right kind of research.
That's right.
That's really going to lead to advances. And then it's also a workforce issue because then when they go into industry, they have the skills, they have the ability to hit the ground running and actually make progress.
That's right. Can I just jump in? What's really also interesting about what's happening with the Chicago Quantum Exchange is that it's making a lot of people quantum curious. Like, in other words, they want to know what the heck is quantum and how does it affect their business and the way that they kind of see the trajectory of their company. So what was really interesting to me was, we have, one of the biggest concentrations of Fortune 500 headquarters of any metropolitan area in the country. And a lot of those corporate companies basically decided that they need to be part of this, and they need to learn how is this going to affect them, even if they're not 100% sure about the use cases this moment. But it really opens people's eyes once they're part of it, and they're like, what if we, did some research or commission research or participated in a study of whether this would help with X, whatever that function is that's important for that company.
And when you start seeing some of the applications, quantum is strange. One of the rules we had for the commission report was you could not say Schrodinger's cat, right? which is a quantum joke. And they have weird names for their different particles. But when you actually get into the applications, they're ones that people can understand. It's computing, it's sensing, it's encryption. So the idea that this used to be the domain of really smart physicists, and now it's becoming a general technology that everyone can think about and make money from, is, I think, one of the big changes we're seeing.
Right, and also the national security applications. You talked about encryption, but there's also de-encryption, which is kind of the flip side of that coin, which our national security agencies are very interested in and constantly also leery of, because I might as well bring it up now. The CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has made quantum one of their key areas where they want to, quote, as Xi Jinping says, occupy the heights. Occupy the heights is just a way of saying they want to dominate this field. They want to have the world's leading technology here, and they have invested, I guess, in maybe multiples of the amount of money that we have invested at the federal level. We invest a lot more at the private sector level in the United States than they do, but they invest so much from the state that we have to do everything we can to at least do our federal share, even at the same time that we're trying to cultivate conditions for more private investment.
One thing that makes me a little nervous is that I got to talk a few years ago to the Chinese scientist who heads the MISJIS program, their quantum communication satellite. He's the real deal. He's really not, they're not faking. But there hasn't been a lot of news about that recently. And that means one of two things. You might know better, Congressman. It means one, they've run into some roadblocks and are stuck. Or two, they've made so much progress that they've decided to go dark and not tell us. And I kind of worry about the latter one.
I, you know, I believe that I have to be careful because I'm a member of the Intelligence Committee as well. So sometimes I start to wonder, where did I get this information from? But I think that it's fair to say that they're making a lot of progress, and we should just assume the worst and make sure that we can plan for the best case scenario here. And we got to redouble our efforts, essentially.
Yeah, no, these are really important points in terms of what the CCP is doing, and in the same way that they're all in on AI, they're all in on quantum.
Totally.
And this is a different situation, right? The United States was ahead in AI from the very beginning. It's a the PRC has really advanced, and so it's a real competition now. But we have some work to do on quantum. So, I mean, this gets into, we've talked a bit about what government maybe shouldn't do in terms of some of the budget. And I would note that the commission recommended that the federal government double the budget for quantum. I would say in the scheme of the federal budget, that's not that much money. But we do live in a time where there are a lot of legitimate concerns about budget deficits and the national debt. So would either or both of you like to make the case that making those federal investments are going to be critical, and how do you weigh that against some of the concerns about the budget?
We part of it was a reaction to the scientists in the group who kept saying we could do a lot more, but we don't have the money. And when we sat down and tried to figure out, so how much money are we talking about? It was 0.5% of the discretionary budget. So this is an investment, as the congressman has said, an investment in the future. It's going to play a major role in national security, not just in encryption and signals intelligence, but in quantum navigation, which will be a solution to the problem of jamming of GPS and EW and drones, the whole bit. So this is a national security priority. Long term, it's also an economic priority, as quantum technologies will be, and this is the 100th year, I think it's the 100th anniversary, is that right, of the discovery of quantum or the discussion of quantum. It takes a while to figure out how to commercialize these things, but the country that figures out how to commercialize it will do a lot better. And the Chinese know this, which is why they're spending so much.
So, thanks to DOGE, NSF has lost almost 200 employees. And my biggest concern is that, because of their kind of last in, first out type of just random kind of selection of employees to downsize, they're basically getting rid of some of our top talent who might have the least tenure within NSF. You need private sector talent for sure, but you also need public sector talent to be able to direct the funding and to oversee it in the most efficacious way. And I'm concerned that we're kind of in this situation where not only is the National Quantum Initiative funding not where it needs to be, but the people who are in charge of administering these programs, making sure they make sense, are also under threat. And then finally, I'm concerned about the signals that it sends to the private sector, because remember, the private sector often makes investments predicated on how they see kind of conditions shaping up at the federal level with regard to investments in a certain area. And so you can look at that. I mean, the best example of that is clean energy investments, which we all know about through the Inflation Reduction Act. If we don't send a strong signal at the federal level and consistently at least maintain funding, if not increase it, we're going to deter private sector investment as well. And then it might shift to other places, including Europe. And so let's not lose our edge. This is a tough enough technology to master, but shooting ourselves in the foot is not going to help us in that endeavor either.
Yeah, I would very much echo that. Before my current position, I was at the National Security Council working
Oh,
on technology issues. Worked very closely with the NSF from the leadership to the staff level. It really takes such a combination of unique skills in order for them to be effective. They not only need to have the technical expertise, they need to understand the budget, they need to understand how to work the interagency. They need, there are so many aspects that go into it. It takes years and years. And so, yeah, having
and
that pipeline too, it's really important.
if I can jump in, and there's politics. I'm sorry to bring that up, but like these people understand, for instance, who in Congress cares about this issue, and where the pain points are, so to speak. Like there might be some legitimate concerns that Republicans or Democrats have about something, and so these folks are the ones who help to address those concerns, make sure that people are comfortable with the direction of funding, so that there's no kind of sudden disruptions. And then they can also make the case to these people for more funding. And say, like, they can say, hey, did you hear about this? Let me show you something that really cool that just happened in the quantum space. And we're ahead of schedule. If we could just have X dollars more, we would be able to do Y. And I think that when you're losing that talent, you're really losing the ability to advocate for the right direction, as well as to study, what the Chinese and others are doing, so that we keep ahead of them.
In January, right before the report came out, I talked to a couple members of the transition team, and I said, hey, I should, because we had some really big requests in the report, most of which I trimmed because of who won the election. And I said, should I trim them even more? And they said, no, this administration will love quantum. So I'm optimistic that once they sort themselves out, they'll start realizing you have to put more money in this if it's going to work in competing with China. So maybe a ray of hope, but let's ask me this question again in 3 months.
Well, I think we need a big, beautiful quantum leap at this point in our funding stream. And I'm hopeful that, like you said, we can kind of get members of the National Security Council, but also, people who are influential with Donald Trump, and of course the president himself, to see that this is this is extremely important, if for no other reason, our national security, which again, there are a lot of advocates within the intelligence community on this issue.
Yes, absolutely. So, in terms of making sure the US is competitive, we talked about workforce, we've talked about budget, and relatedly staffing. What else can the US do to be competitive in quantum? And anything else that's critical for us to look at?
One of the issues that came up repeatedly was that there's an infrastructure for testing and production that you need for quantum. It's kind of like semiconductors, but not entirely. You need different kinds of facilities for refrigeration and for cooling. And there's a whole set of things that, as of yet, don't justify the investment by the private sector. So that's a public good. And that's probably what we need to think about next, is how can we, at a reasonable cost, if you ask these people, how much money do you need, you get some very big estimates. But at a reasonable cost, how do we build the infrastructure for making progress in quantum research and quantum commercialization?
I agree. I never understood until now how much HVAC is so important for quantum. Like the cryogenics are kind of at the heart of kind of creating the requisite conditions for, I guess, the quantum effects to unfold as physicists predict. And so that's where, by the way, going back to the workforce issue, that is a huge kind of challenge, technical challenge, that we need various members of the workforce, including in the trades, the skilled trades, to participate in. I've never seen so many like metal vats and coolers and so forth in a lab. When I went to visit the University of Chicago lab, But if I can say one other aspect of this, I think we need more quantum awareness. I think that right now, if you were to ask one of my constituents, one of my 750,000 constituents, like, what do you think of quantum? I don't think that they would really have a good understanding of the issue to be able to respond. And so whatever we can do collectively to raise awareness of what does quantum computing mean, even if we can get people to understand that, while quantum has many different applications, quantum computing can be like a super duper computer that helps us to solve the most puzzling mysteries of the universe, and lead to world-beating solutions, whether it's in climate change, whether it's in curing cancer. We need to link this technology to everyday problems that people have. That's kind of an ongoing theme that I've sounded repeatedly with the technology space and with scientists, which is we need to create awareness and we need to have grassroots support for this issue for it to really blossom. I think artificial intelligence is starting to get there, although people still fear AI. We don't want that to happen with quantum, because where there's ignorance, there's fear. And we need to make sure that we fill the vacuum and actually do the opposite of creating fear, which is creating hope and support.
Yeah, those are all.
Just real quickly, maybe we need a science fiction blockbuster. Maybe we got the Marvel to pick it up. Right? That's worked in the past.
Jim, what are you going to play, man? What's your role?
It'll depend on the costume.
So what's the superpower Jim Lewis is going to have?
I think that it's not a superpower, and that's why we got to get people used to thinking about is this is another step in the development of physics, the application of physics to the everyday problems we have, whether it's in sensing or in communication or in compute. And I think when people see that reality, when I'm using a quantum tool, it's not going to have a big Q on it that glows in the dark. That's when we'll start to see people. The more we commercialize, the more people will become accustomed to it.
Yeah. Jim, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Sorry, Matt. Sorry to.
Go ahead. No.
This is an open question to you, Matt, and to Jim. But like, if you had to identify one practical application that's happening today that people can relate to, what would you say it is for quantum that you find that people kind of understand?
Do you want to go first, Matt? Or
yeah, absolutely. So, I would really use quantum sensing is very close to commercialization. And I think that everyone understands that when they use their phone, when they're trying to use Lyft or Uber or do location-based services, that it's not very precise. Sometimes it thinks you're across the street. It can be it's great that we have this technology, but it can be very frustrating, right? And so, the ability of quantum sensing, which, may be here, it looks like it'll be here in a few years, to have absolutely precise location. And then, that's an everyday use in terms of, what you can use it for, but then connecting that with the ability of the military in order to, target the right enemy combatants and, all those applications as well that are at the cutting edge. I think I would use that, but I'd also really be interested in Jim's thought.
No, I agree with you. I think sensing is the closest to being deployed. The problem that worries me is that you're now getting an electronic warfare environment that's so intense in Ukraine that people have gone back to using wire-guided drones. It's insane. Think of like a 7-mile fiber optic cable. That's crazy. And the ability to jam affects not only drones in Ukraine, but we're seeing it. You see it when you fly into Tallinn. You see it when you fly into the Middle East. There's jamming, or at least there used to be when the Syria war was going on. That's the one that I think is going to hit people immediately. There is a system that provides for navigation using quantum technologies. Right now, it's so big it only fits on a C-17. But they're working to miniaturize it. So that's what I look for first is when it's going to be in your phone or in something in your car, then people will and really like the precision and the security it might provide.
And I think, I'm not positive, but I feel that one area, in terms of quantum sensing, my understanding is that it can be done underwater. It can be done in places where GPS does not work currently. So you can see like maybe quantum sensing starting to happen in certain sectors, even sooner than others. But it'll be exciting to see how that kind of creates more interest in the field. And of course, who's going to kind of master the technology enough to be able to sell it and make money off of it and employ more people.
Yeah, and that brings up, we've talked about the grassroots. That brings up the point about commercialization that Jim also mentioned. One of the recommendations from the report was to really pursue quantum as a service model, similar to the cloud. These computers initially are going to be so expensive that it will be impractical, particularly for small, medium-sized businesses. To actually use them. And, one aspect of this is we need to avoid, Jim knows all about this, we need to avoid some of the mistakes that we made in cloud in the federal government, right? Where in cloud, the federal government was a laggard. And in quantum, we need to be a leader in terms of this quantum as a service model. So just wondering if either of you have any thoughts on that.
They are expensive, right? Quantum computers, and they require a lot of upkeep. And that's to your previous question, Congressman. Compute is the shiny object for the quantum industry, and so if they're in a race to see who's the first, sometimes they call it quantum supremacy. Every year or so, somebody announces they've achieved quantum supremacy, and eventually it will actually happen. But the ability to connect to these really powerful computing tools will make so many things in medical research, in energy exploration, in many areas in finance, much more efficient, right? But no, one of the first questions we had is, okay, so when can I get my quantum sensor in my backpack? And the answer is, don't hold your breath, right?
So I think a lot of parents are like, when can I get a quantum sensor on my kid? Especially teenagers. But
and if we use quantum encryption, they won't be able to disable it.
Yeah, right. We're gonna set off this crazy kind of quantum warp domestic situations. What I was just gonna say on that is, I think you're right on about quantum as a service. My understanding, and Jim, correct me, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, but the error rates are just so high in these initial computers. That is the biggest kind of impediment to kind of their practical application right now. But all that being said, we know that there's a massive race to lower those error rates to the point where you can actually, start to they become reliable, essentially.
Techies, I mean, this is the kind of problem that will fascinate them, because it's measurable, it's math, it's numbers. And so there's a huge effort in multiple companies, both startups and big companies, to come up to deal with the error problem.
Maybe we should have like you've heard of hackathons. My staff is listening in on this conversation, and they're going to be startled when I say, I think maybe we should, on the committee, since we are the committee that is studying the competition between the U.S. and the CCP, maybe help to sponsor like a quantum-thon or a quantum-a-thon or whatever. How do we create the incentives, whether it's through recognition or rewards, for young people, especially young people, to kind of get involved and start to solve some of these problems through their crowd problem solving model. Also, one other thing, AI. I mean, the interaction between AI and quantum is going to be fascinating, because as generative AI models become more common and more sophisticated, I have a feeling that generative AI is going to be used to help solve some of these challenges in quantum. And then quantum is going to then help to propel generative AI forward. That is in part why, if I were, with the president today, I would tell him, like, this virtuous spiral is either going to happen here in the US or it's going to happen with the CCP. And I can guarantee you it's not going to be as virtuous if it happens over there. And that is another reason why we have to win this competition in both sectors.
Yeah, absolutely. I would echo that. And I would say that staying ahead at every point in the race is critical, because when you have that generative interplay between AI and quantum, we're going to see advancements. In a year, we're going to see advancements that, in comparison would have taken 50 years before, right? And so the ability to build on that, whichever country is able to do that, is going to have an edge that will likely be insurmountable.
You're 100% right. I mean, we sometimes say the sky is falling in Washington to get people's attention, but this is one of those areas where I often do think about quantum and AI as areas where you can make such a leap that you would be able to kind of potentially leave your competitors in the dust permanently if that was your intention. And that goes back to another topic which I spoke about yesterday, which is the semiconductor chips that power AI. We're going off topic a little bit, but that is those export controls as well as the AI diffusion rules are really important there. It all has, they kind of all interplay.
So this was an issue up until the very last minute in drafting the report, because you had one group that felt very strongly that we're not going to see quantum computing and some other quantum technologies, at least until the mid-2030s, right? You had another group that said, no, they're 3 or 4 years out, right? And at the end of the day, in writing it, you know what it's like writing a compromised product. You have to split the baby. But in my thinking, one of the things that came up is it's probably a bad idea to bet against technology. And so if you were betting on the technology rate here, and it seems to have gotten faster, things are more likely to be here earlier than we expected. So I think that's probably another reason to be a little more urgent about this is we don't have another decade to figure out how to make use of quantum.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I mean, the way that we've described it at CSIS is that we're facing several Sputnik moments, right, in a variety of different technologies that we need to address. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on how to do that. The CHIPS Act was really beneficial in terms of making the U.S. competitive in that area, and it's very important. But how should Congress think about having this variety of technologies? How much flexibility should departments and agencies have in terms of what they invest in? Like, how should we approach this in the future? Do you think, if there are legislative opportunities?
Again, I go back to another issue, not to beat a dead horse, but I think that grassroots support is like crucial right now for fundamental research in these different areas. And further support, however that's described. I think there's a lot of state and local support, by the way. I think that I talked about Illinois, but I know Colorado and other states are actively supporting quantum. But like you said, there are different Sputnik moments. You could call it moonshot moments. I think, in fact, I'm pretty sure the Biden administration called the quantum initiative like a quantum moonshot. I think, in China, as you know, they enumerate the various fields where they want dominance or supremacy. They want to occupy the heights, and Xi Jinping and his Politburo make it very clear to every level of society that those are the areas where we are going to devote substantial resources, time, and attention, and that's where we're going to want you to achieve certain goals by certain years. As you know, in the United States, we feel uncomfortable with that concept. We don't like to pick winners and losers among technologies, and certainly within a technology, we don't want to say, like, we want to develop the national champion of quantum. That's not in our DNA. And in fact, I think it's a strength of ours to allow for the market in part to help to determine what ends up being the winner in a certain space. That being said, like, going back to another comment you made, I think the federal government has a very important role to play in seeding, SEED, seeding a certain sector so that 1,000 flowers can bloom. And some startups and some technologies will be more successful than others. And if we can get back to that concept, I think that we will kind of be achieving a compromise between picking winners and losers, and then allowing for kind of basic conditions to exist where others can, take the baton and hopefully win the race.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's one. Go ahead, Matt. I need to think more.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, I love the seed funding approach. I think one of the challenges here is that if you're going to provide seed funding to 1,000 different potential advances, many of them aren't going to work out, right? And we've seen examples where politically that becomes a problem. I think my suggestion is that we really need to do a better job of talking about the success stories and the role that the government played in providing that seed funding for the success stories. And there are just, hundreds of them, of critical technologies. But we'd be interested in your thoughts, because that's something that we need to deal with, is that if we're going to place a lot of bets, some of them are going to work out and some of them aren't. And we're going to need to be able to communicate that to the public, to Congress, and others.
Well, the U.S. used to have a sort of virtuous cycle where you had the government using public funding at the beginning for fundamental research, for R&D, in ways that companies wouldn't do. Now that's changed considerably because companies spend a lot on the D side, on the more applied side of research. You still need the government to come in. And then there's a handoff, we all remember the Valley of Death, to commercial entities. That's a secret of our success, is that we have government-funded research that gets picked up by the private sector. Often it's the university professors who go off and set up their own companies. If you look at many of our big tech companies, that's something the Chinese can't duplicate. Our problem, and this is where the Chinese do have an advantage, is we're really slow, right? And so we got to pick up the pace. And you've seen this in the defense side, you've seen it on the science side, but you can't say, the CHIPS Act is a good example. We needed to move a lot faster. We needed CHIPS too, by the way, I would say. But you've got to repair the virtuous cycle that began with public spending and ended up being commercialized. And we also have to pick up the pace. We're in a real race now, and we're not going to be able to afford the leisure we had maybe a decade ago.
I think, look, I love chips. I love potato chips. I love chips in science. But the main point is, I'm not sure that my Republican colleagues have the stomach for another CHIPS Act. Politically, even though I think that type of industrial policy makes a lot of sense, and it's going to bear enormous fruit, by the way, in the semiconductor space, as we've seen just from TSMC's investments in America alone. I do think that not shooting ourselves in the foot right now would be a good place to start. Starting with like allowing for our immigration system to work well, listening to companies. I think we should convene companies and startups and researchers, and you folks at CSIS do such a wonderful job of this, Jim and Matt. I would just respectfully suggest that maybe we should convene them and bring the Trump administration officials to the table as well. whether it's private or in a public setting, and just listen, and just see if there's any consensus on certain steps that can be taken going forward that everyone can buy into ideologically and practically. Because I agree, we're kind of at that moment where I just sense that there's an inflection point that's happening in this space, just like in others.
Yeah, and I think this comes back to a point about the US versus the Chinese model. And CSIS is absolutely devoted to doing this. But one of the advantages of the US model is, as opposed to the CCP, which, sets priorities, funding levels, top down, doesn't consult anyone, right? Maybe some bets work out, but a lot of them don't. Is that we have that iterative dialogue, right? Industry, civil society, academia, talking with government, both White House, Congress as well. And so that's something that we need to, the Quantum Commission aimed to do, but we really need to accelerate that, particularly with the new administration, in order to be successful in this.
In talking to some Chinese colleagues in Beijing, they think they're winning. And I do think, to the inflection point, the Chinese are now, I consider them a peer. It's easier to calculate that than to think, whereas 10 years ago they were not, right? And what are their advantages? They're fast, right? They don't have a deliberative process. Xi Jinping says, turn left, everyone turns left, or they end up harvesting turnips, right? And they have sustainability, right? So the US, when we wrote the CHIPS Act, Senator Cornyn and Senator Warner and others wrote the CHIPS Act, we realized the US, and this applies to quantum as well, the US was a laggard in terms of supporting its industry. We were at the bottom of the 10 countries that gave funding to semiconductors. The Chinese were not at the bottom. They're willing to spend. And to Matt's point, sometimes it doesn't work. They've squandered huge amounts of money. Ultimately, I think our model is better, but they're willing to spend, they're faster. And that means it's a tougher race than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
So we've touched briefly, I'll shift gears. We've touched briefly on the non-physics side of quantum, but one of the key areas that'd be important to get into a bit more detail is fabrication and test facilities. What do you both think is needed, and how can Congress, state and local governments, how can they support that? And just explain what it is and why it's critical.
Well, it's part of the, you can think of the quantum supply chain. And we haven't touched on starting with, like everything, with minerals and with talent. But you need to be able to have specialized test facilities, specialized fabrication facilities. It is a different technology. And the issue we came up against repeatedly is the economics are such that it's hard for companies, even giant companies, to justify spending, right? So this is a place where I think the public needs to step in and say, just for a while, and this is not new when you think about aircraft or even SUVs or computers, it started out with a heavy dose of federal funding. I know DOGE doesn't like that, but it's inevitable. It's a good story to think about where SpaceX and Tesla got their initial funding from. Yes, some came from Wall Street, and we're in the same position, is that we need to build these facilities to make further progress. And this is one that was a consistent theme of the financial members, the venture capitalists in the group, is this is where the government could really help out.
I would just add one thing, which is, I check me on this, guys, but I think even under AUKUS, there are provisions to provide for cooperation on next generation technologies between the UK, Australia, and the US. And what that means for quantum is that we can start to share some resources in ways that make sense. And so this might be one of them. Testing and fabrication might be an area of interest. Obviously, AUKUS is mainly about building submarines, but there's also an aspect of AUKUS that goes to the issue of how do we, their resources are scarce. How do we kind of leverage our collective resources to advance our mutual progress on technologies of the future in a smart way. So we should do more of that as well.
Australia is a really good example for workforce because they have one of the biggest quantum workforces in the world. And it's the result of a government decision 10 or 15 years ago to start putting money into the universities to train people to do quantum. So Australia has a lot of strength. We're lucky in that we can capitalize on it, as you said. But part of that is not a fluke. It's because they had a policy decision to support quantum that took years to build. You compare the number of quantum scientists, quantum technicians to Australia's percentage of the world population. It's huge. So they're an important ally, but they're also a success story for government intervention.
Yeah, this gets into a really important point as well that the commission highlighted, which is that we have a lot of strengths in the US, in the Chicago area, many other areas in quantum, but we have a lot of other allies and partners that have really made advances in quantum, not only Australia, but in Europe, Japan, elsewhere. And so, we have some debates in terms of how much we cooperate with allies and partners right now versus taking a US only approach. So I'd just be interested in your thoughts about, what it means. How do we make the case that cooperation with allies and partners is critical? And also, what are the mechanisms? We've mentioned AUKUS. What about the Quad? What should we be looking at in order to really create an ecosystem of allies that can be competitive with the PRC?
Well, I think that what we really want to do is obviously work with trusted partners, right? That's like crucial. You don't want to be doing work with folks who might somehow either use the technology in nefarious ways or supply it to people who would use it in nefarious ways. That's why, again, I'm going to go off topic, but I think this applies to the quantum field just as it does in AI. But you might have heard about the Trump administration rescinding the AI diffusion rule. It's a fancy term for basically they're rescinding prohibitions on whom we can sell the most advanced semiconductor chips to in the world. And one of them is in the Middle East. And so we're about to sell the most advanced semiconductor chips in the world to companies in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia, which is a horrible idea. Why? Because they're just going to sell that stuff and make it available to the Chinese. And we have export controls right now that prohibit the direct sale of this stuff to the Chinese. Similarly, with regard to quantum, or for that matter, other technologies, we've got to come to terms with the notion that we need to work with trusted partners. And that means, in some cases, we're going to have to exclude certain countries that we can't trust in kind of fabricating or coming up with world-beating solutions and technology of the future.
Yeah, and I know we have to wrap up, but I would just add, to the extent that we are providing the most advanced technology, that should come with conditions of strategic alignment, right? Broadly in technology, and to use that leverage in order to have countries enter our system or the PRC's ecosystem and have to make a choice. So I know we're out of time.
Let me just say real quickly though, Matt, we should have a longer conversation about the AI diffusion rule because it was not helpful, right? And there's parts here that we probably shouldn't discuss on Zoom, but let's have a longer conversation about why getting rid of it needed to be fixed. Switzerland and Poland are military opponents. When did that happen? The Swiss guards are going to march down Michigan Avenue. Let's save it for a longer conversation.
Let's say Switzerland for a longer conversation. But I think at the end of the day, unfortunately, we can't trust all entities in the world with our crown jewels, and we just have to realize that's reality.
Well, a teaser for a future conversation. I want to thank the Congressman and Jim for what was a very important and stimulating conversation, and really encourage the audience. This is a whole of society effort, so please engage with all of us. And you know, this is something that we're going to continue, and we're going to have to put all of our efforts in. So thank you very much, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.